I'm really excited to welcome you to this morning's webinar. As you can see, me and Emilio got the memo today of dressing in white and sharing our innocence with you visually, which may or may not be true. There's quite a small group online today, which is great. We are recording this session, and you will be receiving this recording with the follow-up emails from it. We'll also be posting it on the YouTube channel as well, which is great. We've got tons to go through. Just before I introduce our very special guest, just a little bit of housekeeping. So there is the chat box on the right-hand side, and please feel free to typing any messages that you have or any questions that you have for the two of us, and we'll be running a couple of polls there as well. There is a couple of us in the background, so if you've got any technical issues or you're struggling to hear or see us clearly enough, then pop them in there and we'll scramble about as much as we can in the background and try and fix it for you. The platform is relatively simple to use, so hopefully it's nice and straightforward. Now, it will be an interactive session, so again, I think me and Emilio, we were kind of off air there, just waxing lyrical about the pains of the industry, and the team are like, keep all this insight for the chat. So we may or may not go off on a tangent. So if you have any questions, take advantage of asking Emilio that as we go on. So I will stop sharing this slide here and bring Emilio on. So first of all, good morning. How are you?
Yeah, really good, thank you. Luckily enough, Joseph's come back from his honeymoon as well, so it's been good to be able to have a conversation with the team as well. So we've been able to put some new tech as well in place this week, and we've onboarded some new clients this month. So it's been all good fun.
So hold that thought. Let's not end before we begin. Heaton Vences, describe the practice and describe even your journey within that practice and how you guys got started.
So Heaton Vences is something that we established around 5 years ago now. And the reason why we established it was because when Joseph and I were working in a corporate background, we weren't satisfied with our roles. So often we felt like we were demoralized, we didn't feel valued. And often we saw a lot of pain points as well in the industry where people weren't communicating with one another, especially with their clients. And there were a lot of internal issues, especially around systems and processes. So we saw an opportunity to kind of be like the young mavericks in the industry, to say like, okay, let's join the accounting industry as business leaders, and let's set up a practice that focuses a lot on advisory, and also develops a system and a process that delivers compliance in a more efficient and effective manner. So that was the ultimate goal. But if you look at HV from an entire, from a brand, we like to focus a lot on the marketing. We like to focus a lot about what we're trying to say, how we want to look. So it's not just about just building an accounting firm. It's also building a brand and a business that can withstand any of the economic changes that we're all facing at this very moment in time.
So you mentioned you guys were in the industry and you noticed some frustrations or some issues. One of them you said about communication, internal communication and external, but then you also mentioned systems and processes. I mean, stripping it straight back, like, how did you notice those inefficiencies, and what is it that you use to sort of analyze that? Because with the greatest respect, if you're in industry and you notice it the other way, like, what was and you mentioned pain points there. So what were those sort of initial ones out with communication that you saw, and how did you go about sort of analyzing that there was a better way to do it, or the way that the status quo were doing it wrong?
Well, I worked in a very large corporate organization. So for them, like, everything was centered around audit, right? So often the communication was like once a month, or it was like once a year. So, and when I say communication, it was all email. It wasn't really like client facing. So often the biggest issue was that they were using outdated systems that weren't really functioning in terms of delivering a positive relationship with the customer. And again, often it was the client wasn't really, like, the ultimate shareholder wasn't really talking to them, because these organizations were quite large. It was often that we're talking only to, like, to a financial controller or a finance director. So those people were actually not the people that were actually wanting to drive the business further than what they could control. It was just that they were employed in that situation to be able to fulfill their role. So we wanted to change that as well by being able to talk directly to those small business owners, because that's where we kind of are able to empathize with them because of being business owners ourselves. But what I noticed, again, going back to email, was that was the only chain that they were using with clients. So that's why, everyone's using WhatsApp now, right? Everyone's using these different communication channels. But I think the way that we talk to our clients is making sure we talk to them on a monthly catch up. So we're talking to them for at least an hour every single month. So that's where we already knew that we're going to get more value out of the relationship, because we're talking to them about all the systems, we're talking to them about strategy behind their business, we're talking about all the financial data, because it's all live and up to date on Xero. So a lot of those conversations allow us to expand on also looking at other technological changes they need to adapt. So by doing that, we're able to advise as much as we need to, according to that relationship that we have with them. And also, clients are different, right? So one client is going to be more responsive than another. So it depends on how much you can get out of them in that conversation. And the more that you can discuss with them, the more that you can look at ways that they can use other systems. We were talking earlier about, like, instituting Dext or Apron and things like that, where it's not just the use of Xero and HubDoc that's going to allow them to expand their business. There's other things that they could align in their systems that will help them grow and scale. But yeah, when I was working at my old firm, it literally just felt like, we were just, it didn't feel like we had any input. So a lot of those systems I didn't even know who was in charge of putting those systems in place. That was what's crazy about it. I had no idea who was responsible for that at the top end. So how was I able to kind of be the person to say, actually, we should do this, we should do that? Because ultimately you should rely on also not just leadership, but you should also rely on your people to be able to give you, some insight in terms of what they've seen. Because the more people that you have looking out there for different systems and different processes, ultimately you can then look and review them and look at the pros and cons associated to each different app that you want to add to your stack.
And I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like when you started off, the priority of Heaton Vences was to talk to clients, maybe not, whereas again, the traditional firm, if you like, and I hate using that terminology, is maybe the priority is just doing the compliance part, but you're flipped that on the head. So how was that when you get started? You perhaps got a smaller client base and you guys have got the time to actually dive into that and have the conversations. Talk to me about that journey of getting started, and then you going, Christ almighty, like I'm doing nothing but talking to clients now. We are kind of struggling with the workload, because and again, we spoke off air that how many people that I talk to daily that say, just not got the resources, I'm just bogged down with paperwork and compliance and client demands more than anything. So if your number one strategy is to actually find out more demands and find out how you can help those demands, how did you balance that sort of, was there a tipping point where you go, right, we are going to have to scale here, or we're going to have to look for other ways of doing the work? And that's maybe a leading question onto the topic of it.
I mean, to be complete transparent, when we started the business, we didn't look that far, because our goal was ultimately to get out of our situations and to have our own control. And it begun really, it begun with ease, because again, we had time, right? When you start with your first client, you can fit another 30 clients into your portfolio to be able to talk to them. But then when you start maxing out that portfolio, you realize, again, like you said, how do you have time to focus on the compliance? How do you focus on the operations of the business, when reality is you're talking to clients all day? And that's why we kind of wanted to expand via an outsourced model, because one, I don't have the time to look at recruitment. I don't have the time to look for the right hire, because I don't have that expertise. I'm not an HR specialist, and I don't want to be. And to be honest, even from a legal point of view, there's a load of complications around that as well. You got to treat employees very different from how you would treat like an outsourced model or a resource. And again, we've gone down that route because we felt we had more flexibility as an organization, how our business model worked. because we were doing a lot of the advisory on the top end, we knew that was always going to be handled. We weren't laying that off to someone else below us or across from us, because again, we don't want to say there's any structure, because we want it to feel like it's flat. But we didn't want someone else to feel like, you know, in another role that they had to take on that responsibility. Ultimately, it was on us still to have that client relationship. And below, it was basically for them to kind of look at the compliance and make sure that that was handled efficiently. Again, we're still managing the team, right? Because we've spread the responsibilities accordingly between, you know, Kevin, Joseph, and myself. We've made sure where we feel comfortable with different aspects of the business that we're focusing on those bits ourselves, rather than like trying to cross wires all the time, because that's where a lot of organizations go wrong. They try and empower too many people, and those people have too many of the same roles involved in their responsibilities. So by defining those roles, we were able to kind of differentiate what we were responsible for in our discretionary time, because it's not just about meetings, it's not just about operations, it's not just about systems and processes. Sometimes it's more about what's the strategy of the business, how can we look at other things that we're doing or other revenue sources, how do we expand this business for the next 5 years. And that's, you know, as an organization, we don't want to work forever, right? No one's going to want to work forever. We ultimately would look to sell this business in 20 to 30 years time if that's what we want to do, but we always got to be prepared for a sell. And that's why we always want to make sure every day that we're committed to this business, it's open and it's available to do so.
I love that. Always being prepared for the
Yeah.
sale. That you
Yeah.
couldn't hit the nail on the head for me. Just sort of rewinding back before we go into the sort of outsourcing part. If you spoke to yourself and Joseph and perhaps Kevin like 5 years ago, 6 years ago when you
Yeah.
started, did you ever imagine that you would pick outsourcing, or you know, when you started you're like, no, this is our baby, or was it even, you know, was it even anything that crossed your mind?
Well, Kevin actually had many businesses before, so he was already equipped to understand like the perks and the cons around employment, right? So at the time, he already had dealt with that situation before, so he was able to give us a lot of insight in terms of what we shouldn't do and what we should do. So at first, we didn't really have really a game plan on how we were going to hire, who we were going to bring in, what type of resource we would use. Are they going to be outsourced? Are they going to be in-house? But it came to a point where I think when we learned more about ourselves and our business model, that's when we decided that outsourcing was going to be the best choice for us. And just to reiterate to everyone that's obviously listening in, I'm not saying it's the best model. I'm just saying it's the best model for what we do and how we operate as a business. So it's not like saying employment's bad. It's just saying that, you know, what we've chosen works for us.
Yeah, any of the firm check or anyone that's worked with me in the past will know when I'm recruiting, and you're so right about recruiting. It's such a time drain. It was good when I worked for a big company, because we had a people operations team and they could sift through the CVs and they could put the right candidates or what they thought was the right candidates in front of you. When you're smaller and you're dealing with 50 CVs, you're like, this is going to take me a week just to get through these CVs. And then but whenever I was in an interview with someone, and you know how you always give them 10-15 minutes, like, can you ask me any questions? And 90% of the time the question back to me was, yeah, how do I become a manager? And that like, I would discount that person right away, because you're like, you have no idea what it's like being a manager. This is being a manager, and it's not what I'm employing you to do, and it's not what you really want to do. So I sympathize with that a lot. Okay, so looking at the outsourcing element, and obviously you've kind of said there, and I kind of want to drum on this theme that you said off air, but I think I want to keep coming back to it, is that leadership sort of role in running your business as a business, rather than, you know, running an accountancy practice. But when you first looked at outsourcing, obviously you had a strategy that you wanted to give advisory and talk to the clients. But how did you decide what you do and what you outsourced, and how did you go about making that decision, and then ultimately how you then go about finding the outsourcing solutions for those problems that you have?
Yeah, I mean, there's two sides, right? So there's one looking at the bottlenecks of the business, So I know that me doing the compliance is just me becoming a bottleneck, because I know there's a resource out there that can do it better or more, more efficiently than I can. So if I know there's someone out there for us to bring into the business, then of course that's something that we're going to want to do, right? But when it comes to advisory, I still think there's a level of, I don't think there's anyone out there in terms of in the outsource model where they can actually provide that level of service. I think that still needs to be in-house, because that level of service is obviously built around what we believe, what our mission statement is, and exactly how we think. So we can't expect that from our outsource team to see the same way that we do, right? But we do try and make sure, as part of our analysis, to ensure that if there's anything that we're doing that we shouldn't be doing because we don't either enjoy it, because we're not that great at it ourselves, or if, like, for example, we know we will be better at managing it, then of course I'm gonna look at outsourcing it, because it's also about having a good relationship with the firm that you're working with, even if it's you're going direct to the freelancer it's yourself, or you're going to a firm like we use, B3. We outsource to them. So for them, they do all the hiring. They know exactly what type of business we're like, so we function differently from other firms. So again, they understand us fully. So they'll look for a new hire based on like what we need rather than what they need. So it's ultimately they're kind of like an outsourced HR firm as well, in a way, because they're ultimately doing that work for us without us thinking about it. But it's, again, it's outsourcing is tricky, because you also got to look at it differently. You can't look at it from a very two-dimensional point of view, right? Because I know I see a lot of people on LinkedIn talking about, oh, I've gone to this outsourced firm, I had a bad experience. But again, it goes back to what you talked about, leadership. The people above need to be the ones that need to lead the team, right? So everyone's looking at, okay, employment's bad, doesn't work for me, my business model doesn't work with employment, so I'm going to look at outsourcing. They go to outsourcing and they say, outsourcing doesn't work for me because something's wrong with the process. But the reality is they never look at themselves. So it always needs to start from the top end. It needs to see, like, okay, how am I talking to my team? How am I influencing them? How am I encouraging them? How am I talking to them? Are they actually part of my team, or am I just directing them to say, do this, do that? And it needs to be that they need to feel eager to ask questions. They need to be part of the conversation. They need to be in Microsoft Teams, asking questions all the time, learning more about them, their personal lives. There's a lot more into those people, because they are people. They are people that want to add value, and that's how we look at it.
So going back to a point there where you say, "Oh, I've had a bad experience with
Mhm.
outsourcing," and then probably going back to your initial point there of why you picked it and bottlenecks, and I actually, if I can be really simplistic when it comes to technology, I mean, using Zero and Dext and Firm Check,
Yeah,
you are outsourcing to technology, really,
yeah, I am.
is what
Yeah,
you're doing. And I've certainly seen it in my experience, people churning or signing up to technology and paying for it and not using it properly, but they're kind of expecting that I've got a problem, I've signed up to Firm Check, that, oh, that problem's still here. Why is that problem not
yeah,
away? And I'm
yeah.
guessing that that's almost the same as outsourcing. It's like,
It is.
yeah, you might think you need outsourcing, and you probably do need outsourcing, but you need to
Yeah.
know the reason why you want it. So when you mentioned bottlenecks, what were some of the key bottlenecks, one or like top couple of bottlenecks that you really saw? Don't be scared to say AML on one of these, that you saw that were stopping you guys doing the job that you wanted to do.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I'll just sort of finish with a little anecdote, finish this question with an anecdote. I was involved in some accounting research a couple of years ago, and we
Mhm.
used to ask accountants, why are you an accountant? What made you become an accountant? And the top answers were always, I want to help small businesses, I want to help people grow, I like being an expert in my field, blah 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 blah.
Yeah,
And then we asked the same group, well, what is it that you do? And it was like, oh, we do data entry, we correct mistakes, and we chase up our clients. And it's going, well,
yeah,
you train for 7-8 years to do something with a lot of energy, but you spend your time doing something else.
yeah, yeah.
It's time to swap that balance about. So
100%.
those bottlenecks, what were the top ones? And then again, I suppose we're always going to come back to leadership. Was it how you then communicated that with yourselves as the
Yeah,
strategy of the business to go and fix those problems?
yeah. Because we actually weren't spending enough time on strategy. So it meant that because of not having all that discretionary time for ourselves, we're actually just focused on the operations for too long. So the reality was that how would we have conversations about improving the business if we're just focusing on all the compliance work and then also only the advisory? When you scale your business, all of a sudden you've got like 5, 6 clients that join you from the advisory capacity, and all of a sudden you're stuffed for time. You don't have enough time to focus on the actual business. So what you do is you think, great, I'm still getting money in, so tomorrow I'm going to have enough money to put food on the table. I'm going to be able to take more dividends out of the business. It's all great, right? Everything looks shiny and everything's great. But the problem is you get stuck. And then when you don't have that ability to get out of that rut, you don't have the opportunity to find ways in mitigating those bottlenecks, right? So that's why we've tried to make it a conscious effort every month just to say, okay, what is still going wrong here? Like, and Kevin's really good at it because he directs us in that manner in those meetings to say, can I advise you guys to do this? Or can I advise you guys to do this differently because this isn't working? And so you need someone to say to you no more than they say yes. And that's the biggest problem, is that everyone's always saying yes in these accounting firms. Like, let's take all this tech, let's take this and let's try this. But someone needs to be back on the other end saying, why are you doing it though? It doesn't make any sense. Like, this doesn't add value. It just looks shiny on the box, but reality doesn't do anything. So it's the same thing when we said, okay, going back on AML, which you mentioned first, AML was a big problem for us because we were trying to do a lot of it ourselves. Because again, when you're a portfolio holder, you bring in a new client, you feel responsible for that whole phase of that relationship and the onboarding process. The reality is, and Kevin's been on webinars with you before, and he's pointed out really well, is that you don't outsource the responsibility, do you? That's the whole idea. You're still responsible. You're still responsible at the ultimate end of it because you're still the business owner. But the idea is that you're outsourcing the role, the action, the consequence of doing those things, and ultimately you're still there to review it. So that's the idea, is that to reduce the time that you're spending on things is what you should be focusing on, because it's the same reason as a tech firm. I'm pretty sure firm check look at this all the time. You look at, how do I reduce the number of clicks that my users go throughout the whole process? If I can reduce those clicks, that is ultimately reducing the bottleneck as well, because if I can reduce their time on the platform, then AML is no longer a struggle for them. They can focus on other things in their business. But what happens then is, by reducing their time, the value is worth more as well, because it's always about, there's always a price tag to everything that you save. So that's where we looked at AML. We looked at compliance because, again, we want to make sure our accounts are delivered on a timely manner. We want to make sure they're within 2 months after year end at most. Everything about like internal training as well. So recently we've looked at using like Scribe.
Yeah.
And so that's already like started using that with a few clients already, and it's really helped them understand like the process and driving that. But also internally, what we're doing is going to start building like this complete handbook essentially with Scribe. And so like things that are often asked in like 30-minute meetings can actually be just delved into within like looking on Notion that's linked to Scribe, and they can go on there and look at the training guide. So that's all about saving time. How do I remove myself involved in that process? And I realized that's the biggest problem. I'm training people too often, but I'm not seeing the result from it. So I need to kind of reduce my time in the business as much as I can.
And I can just sense some of the audience, just Notion, Scribe, like tools that I love. And, it's all amazing.
Yeah.
There. So how does just going back to the outsourcing guys there, and you said something really really great there earlier about they are still people. So you see people on LinkedIn saying it's a bad experience. Absolutely. You guys go to all the accounting events, and and I've been going to them for the last 10, 12 years, and things definitely go in trends. A few years ago it was all about payments. Certainly when FirmCheck launched, there was like 8 AML tech companies out just coming out of the woodwork. I would say this year it was outsourcing. There was just outsourcing everywhere. So you guys have done it well. So what do you think has contributed to you guys making outsourcing successful? I mean, there's probably numerous points here, but If we look at the sort of normal pillars that we look at of technology,
Mhm.
process, people, your data security, what do you think is really made it a success for you guys, and perhaps a bad experience for others?
Yeah. I think you just can't um, expect one experience to rule your whole idea of outsourcing. It needs to be that you try different things, you experiment with different outsource providers to get a glimpse in terms of what actual value looks like. Because it's like any organization. If let's reverse it, right? If I went to the UK and I looked for an accounting firm, and I'm a small business owner, I've got a plumbing business, right? I've got how many accounting firms available to me in the UK? So there's loads, right? I mean, I'm pretty sure that we're talking about like 30,000 or something like that accounting firms, because that includes all the sole practitioners. So you got all those people out there delivering a service. Now, let's be honest, how many of them are actually good at delivering that service? Because we've all seen many bad accounting firms, right? This goes back into the same premise of every business that you look to outsource to, every business that you look to have a relationship with isn't going to be the same as the other, right? So you've got to experiment with who's going to provide that value to you and whether it's valuable enough for you to pay for it. And that is ultimately what you need to do. It's like most times I take on a new client, they're like, oh well, the other account's shit and all this crap, and they're awful at what they do, and they don't talk to me. Everything, this experience has been, incredible even after like day one. I can't believe I didn't make this decision sooner. After having that conversation, I think to myself, like, how many accountants did you have before? They tell us they've had 4 accountants before, and still they've had that problem of finding the right one. So that's taken them what, 10 years to find the
Yeah.
right place. It's the same thing with outsourcing. It's just about talking to the right people to influence you to say, have a word with B3, have a word with the right people that you need to talk to, rather than listening to the crap over there in the corner that doesn't really actually want to add value. They just care about the volume and the numbers. And
And,
that's
and
really where the difference is.
Yeah, and David, good morning. David has just put a little question there. How important is reviewing the product received back from the outsource
Hmm.
workers?
Yeah.
That's probably, and I'll let you just answer that, but that's probably
Yeah.
related to what you're saying. It's and it almost goes back to the constant theme of leadership as well. It's just like
Hmm.
you do have to constantly review everything, and dedicate
Yeah.
time and put time in the calendar to review things, because even things that are going well can suddenly go bad, and
Yeah.
you can't take your eye off it. But yeah, how important is it of reviewing the products
Very
that you
important. Just the
manage
same
them
way
with?
you'd just say same way you would look at feedback reviews of in-house staff, right? You need to treat it as if like they're your own team. You need to give the same level of feedback, but also if you're trialing one on like just the first job, right? So like say for example, you went to B3, they'll probably offer you a one-off job on one of your accounts. So one of your clients, they'll say, okay, we could do this year end for the 31st of October. Give me all the information that we need to start with. Let me know more about the client, how do they function, how do they work. Okay, and then they're going to put together the working papers. They'll put together all the accounts for you and go from there. Again, there'll still be a review process involved where you'd need to look at it, because again, you are the person that's signing them off at the end of the day, right? But it needs to be that when you receive, say, a set of accounts that might not be fitting to what you would expect them to be, there's feedback to be given. There's always that process. It's like treating someone who's a trainee or a senior accountant. They're still going to make mistakes no matter where they are, if they're outsourced or in-house. But the only way for them to learn is by your feedback. And it's also trying to kind of have like a formalized process, a policy in place internally, so that you can have that time with them to help them understand like where things are going right, where things are going wrong. Ensure that, say for example, B3, we've got an account manager as well that can also hold people accountable for their actions as well, and also the feedback that we give them. So someone's actually taking account of what we're giving them and making those review points actionable. Whereas, if you go to some other firm or if you don't institute those methods, nothing's going to happen. It's just going to be that you're going to receive a mediocre service because they don't know whether it's bad or good. It's just them assuming without knowing.
And can I sort of ask a bit of a controversial question then?
Hmm.
Do you think accountants and business leaders or senior partners in firms are equipped to have those conversations?
I think most firms out there should find a way to be equipped, but I would say I don't have the I wouldn't from my point of view, I wouldn't know internally whether partners have been put in place to be equipped to deal with outsourcing or to be able to deal with their technological changes. I wouldn't know. But I do think it's really important to not have too many partners involved in too many same things. Like, there's so many people out there who cross wires, and it's like their responsibilities are going to be focused on tech. But then there's another partner who's really interested in tech as well, and he's like, I really want to get involved too. Well, the reality is that person that's dedicated their time to it, and that other person that's dedicated their time to it, is just wasted time. It needs to be that there always needs to be responsibilities given and defined roles in any organization, because leadership doesn't just, it's not about defining your roles up above, but it's also setting an example for people below or across from you that also want to be in your position. And so that's why we talked about HV hubs and stuff. That's one thing we're doing that's going to be set up so that we can then empower other chartered accountants to also use our model and have their own business. So that's the whole angle of why that's how HV is going to expand in that model, because we're then empowering leaders in their role to not have to think about those things, because ultimately Joseph, Kevin, and I at the back end are going to do all that stuff for them.
Yeah.
And that's where some of those models, I think they're trying to do too much amongst all of them, whereas reality is no one's defining their roles properly.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, especially when you get to larger firms. It's that decision inertia, or
so we're gonna get 10 other partners to sign off this one thing. It's like,
yeah,
well, it's not gonna be actioned.
And we had a firm, I won't name it, but 9 minority shareholders. It was a firm that had been involved in a lot of acquisitions, and 2 offices didn't do any AML whatsoever. 6 kind of done some, and 2 done it very, very well. And it was just like the MLRO wanted to adopt firm check, but couldn't get the buy-in from the other 9. But she was the MLRO, and she was in tears. She was like, "There's my neck's on the line here, but I can't get buy-in from others because XYZ doesn't want to do it." Just a couple of final questions on tech, and then how you use that with outsourcing. We'll go to questions, and then don't spoil the surprise about HV hubs. I want everyone to leave about HV hubs. You spoke. You obviously adopt firm check, which is great. You were an early adopter of us. You spoke about Zero, internal software like Scribe, and then you also mentioned like Apron. You obviously adopt technology at early stages, and you're like that. So how do you guys go about making that decision about what tech to adopt? Because you can adopt technology for the sake of it, and sometimes you don't always need it. So how do you go about, and what's the decision making process there with technology? Is it you? Is it Joseph? Is it Kevin? Or I know you're quite a tight knit team, but how do you go about?
It's easier to do so.
how do you go about discovering that technology, but making the right decision? Because sometimes you've got the right technology, but actually you don't need it. You can, to your point, you can say no. That's a great bit of kit, but actually we don't need that. And so how do you go about making those decisions?
I mean, there's so many times we see like nice new tech and we're like, oh, I really want to use that. Like, it looks really good. Then you look at the price tag and you think like, oh, great, this is gonna eat into our profits. But it needs to be realistic, right? Because I'll give you a prime example of what we tend to do is that, like, Joseph or I will go out and like try something where we feel like it could add value, and normally just enter into a trial, so experiment with it ourselves. And then normally what would happen is that I mean it tends to be that we kind of like said to me, like, as my responsibility is like, you should focus on systems and processes. So the idea is then when we bring in tech in, I can then play with it and see how it fits into our business model. But it normally would be, we would just play with something to see whether it works how it's been promised on the website. Like what are the features as part of that app? Like, what is actually changing our way of delivering our services to our clients, and how do our team benefit from this new introduction? And if we can see there's actually some positives around it and they outweigh the cons, then it's worth trying it out and seeing how we adjust for it for the first few months. And we've done it in the past, right? We've taken on tech where we're like, this is awful after 6 months time, because we realize people aren't adopting it as well as we thought, or it may have gone up in price, or it was already expensive when we had begun. There's loads of different things where there's loads of cons associated to adopting this new tech, but you don't know until you try. You can't. It's like the same thing. Like if you wouldn't set up your own business or your own firm, or be part of another firm, or become an accountant or chartered accountant, if you weren't eager to try something new, right? Because again, you're committing yourself to something quite substantial, and then you might be left with nothing at the end of it. But the reality is, yeah, that might be the case, but you still got to try and get there to the end to see whether it was worthwhile at all, right? So that's our mindset, is that we want to just try and push as much as we can around playing with things, experimenting with things, because that's how we learn. And by us then going into monthly meetings, it allows us to say, let's reflect on how this is adding value. And this actually doesn't do as much as we think it would do. So let's just remove it. Let's not use it anymore, because it may have taken up a little bit of time, but you may have lost out on the opportunity if you didn't try it out. So that's why it's also, like I said, look at the pros and cons. If the pros and cons outweigh the cons, go further and try it. If you still later on think, actually, the pros and cons weren't exactly what we thought they were going to be, then of course, if the cons now start to outweigh the pros, then of course, then you need to get rid of it. But it's not that complex. It's I think a lot of organizations get scared of it, but you're trying things. You don't have to be 100% committed to it, but at least spend, I don't know, 10% of your day every part of your week just playing with it, trying it out. And then if it still doesn't work for you, then sack it off. Go to something else.
I'm somehow going to shoehorn this back to AML. So
Yeah.
you'll see I've got a degree in blagging and wiggling my backside.
It's okay.
And it gets me out of trouble quite a lot. Thanks for having the first swear word as well. I'm scared it was me, but thanks for you.
It's all right. So hopefully no one posts it on LinkedIn afterwards.
You kind of mentioned, and I just want to tie this back to the outsourcing, but I'll try and shoehorn AML in here. You did say it's not complex, and technology is not complex, and reviewing it's not complex, and the harsh reality is that you're probably, when you're reviewing things and reviewing processes and things like that, you're probably like AML. You're doing that every day. You're asking yourself questions: can I do this better, or is this right, or have I got sneaky suspicions of X, Y, Z? The review part is actually just documenting it or discussing it, or actually committing to it. It's not like, and I know David's online here. We say AML is actually fairly simple. David Vences says AML is fairly simple, and actually you ask yourself the AML questions every single day when you're talking to your clients, or you're doing a trial balance, or you're doing a set of accounts. You're asking yourself these questions. AML is the art of documenting it and making sure the policy and controls are in place with that. And I suppose that's what you're talking about when you're looking at your technology choices. You're saying, God, I wish there was a better way of this, but actually just dedicating some time of documenting it, putting a strategy in place, putting controls in place, do that. How important when you're making these choices, because I know when you adopted us, and certainly our enhancement of the product, which I need to get back to Kevin about, is certainly drove us to that, to be able to outsource AML, but you guys still take control. So how important is it when you're adopting technology that you involve the outsourcing element of your business? How do you go about that? And do you take responsibility in that training, or how big it would be pointless you not wanting to do AML and adopting firm check, and you can't outsource the admin part of it at the same time, giving someone the responsibility of saying, yes, I approve that. So how does that come in, and how much ownership do you guys take of that?
I mean, we're ultimately responsible for everything that comes into the business, right? Because we made the choice to adopt that new technology. So it needs to be us that is responsible for ensuring that at least whoever we're working with, in this example, B3, that they're aware of their obligations associated to what we've brought in, right? And they understand that we're there to train them. That they're not gonna completely know the ins and outs of how we want to run that system, because everyone runs a system very differently. It's the same way most people go on Xero, they use Xero differently. It's like, it doesn't have to be a one set way, you know, like some people like to use bank rules, some people don't like to use bank rules. Like, it's okay. Like what works for you needs to work for you, but everyone has their way of doing things. Some people like to use auto publish on Dex, and that goes through and they're happy with not having to review it. But there are people out there that want to review that process. And the same goes into AML. We want to make sure that the process is driven by our team as well, so that we're not spending so much time on it. So we do train them initially to help them understand, okay, where, even though we're not saying the responsibility is given to them ultimately for the check itself, but we're saying part of the process they can be responsible for until it gets to us, so that we are able to then review it and still safeguard our business. Because that's all that we care about. Two things: safeguarding our business and safeguarding our clients. That's the two main things we care about, right? Because if you take on the wrong client, that also means your other clients aren't safe, because it impacts your business. So your business is impacted because the choices that you make by taking on new clients who aren't the best fit. So the AML is a really important thing. You have to have open eyes. Even though it might be simple, you have to have open eyes, right? And so that's where people go wrong. They close their eyes to AML, even though because the process is simple. But it needs to be that there needs to be a process, like with firm check, that allows you to follow it, so that you're actually following a proper process, a proper system in place that safeguards you from making that mistake from closing your eyes.
Boom. There's my soundbite for LinkedIn. Apart from just final two questions about outsourcing, then we'll talk about what that has enabled you guys to do moving forward. Again, just when picking, I think a lot of people are concerned about security and data security and things like that. So, you know, just a quick couple of lines on your experience with that, and then a question that's just came in here as well. And I suppose AML's tied to this. You know,
it is. Yeah.
A lot of people are have to follow the guidelines of their supervisory bodies or their professional bodies when it comes to AML, which is absolutely true. What about your membership of the professional body when it came to making your outsource selection as well? Because obviously you get a practice license from these guys. You want to make sure that you're following their guidelines. So I suppose that was two questions, but you can answer any one of them. It's up to you.
Yes, it's through ACCA, right? So the ultimate our focus is to ensure that we're compliant based on their regulatory requirements. But again, also they're reporting to the FRC, right? So that's the ultimate. All these organizations are doing the same exact thing. They all have the same processes in place. They all want to make sure that they're following their processes properly. So that's why they're carrying out these audits, because they don't want to be caught off guard either. But the reason why we chose like ACCA is, for example, and that's why we've gone with ACCA, like an ACCA approved employer for our outsourced firm, is that they can then see eye to eye with why it's important about, you know, around AML. And it's not because I'm saying, oh, ICAW or AAT or CIMA or whatever organization you're part with doesn't take it into the same account. But I do think because we can empathize with the person that has studied it through ACCA. We know what rigorous training they would have had to go through. So we know that, okay, they're going to see eye to eye with the way that we see AML. It's not that we're trying to say anyone's any better or worse. It's just that we can empathize with those people. So then therefore they can give us a lot of value out of that relationship, and we can hold them accountable for some of that process.
Great. And with all this and all this great work that you've done with advisory and sort of getting rid of the work that you don't want to do, but
you haven't seen what work we do. It might be crap.
No comment. You mentioned HV Hubs a couple of times, so tack on, discuss what HV Hubs is. I think is an unbelievable thing. I've spoken about this for many years. That, you know, a lot of people in the software game, when they get out of working for a company, they go and advise other software companies. I think the pain point is exactly what you guys are focusing on. So
thank you.
Explain what HV Hubs is, and you know, share what it is that you're looking to do. Maybe touch on why and I'll put a wee blog post on the comments chat just now as you're doing it. But unleash about HV Hubs, because I think it's just a tremendous thing.
Thank you. I mean, I'll tell you a story like how I felt, right? Because when I when I didn't set up the business and when I was working for another firm, the honest truth is every morning I woke up and I felt like absolute shit, right? Because I would even cry in the evenings because I was still working overtime and I wasn't actually getting remunerated for it. So there were times where, like, you push yourself so much for an organization for so long, and they still don't value you after all that time. And I'm not saying there are not organizations that value you, but when something goes wrong, who's the first person to blame, right? It's the person that's prepared it. And it's always that case. Instead of actually finding like we talked about leadership, there's an opportunity to help the person learn, help the person grow and learn. That's ultimately why we started H3 Hubs, because we can empathize with that situation. So we wanted to create opportunities for chartered accountants out there to say, look, you can have your own business, you can have something that you own for yourself. Now we structured it slightly because when we first brought it out, like, we thought we had the right idea with everything. And as slowly as we go through it, we realize, like, actually that could be changed slightly because that doesn't fit in perfectly with our model. So now we've done it so that someone would get remunerated already based on already having some share ownership in an H3 Hub. And the idea is that H3 Hub is basically, we're not going to say franchise, it's not a franchise. It's more of like a fully managed service provision. So, like, ultimately we're providing a service to the H3 Hub, and they can benefit from our level of expertise, our resources, our tech stack, everything that we've done internally, even like everything to do with our wiki and Notion, to everything in terms of everything that we're doing on Scribe, everything that we're doing on Loom, everything that we're doing in order to maximize as much as we can for these people. We're saying we can give you the best return by being a H3 Hub owner, and that's what we're trying to envisage for these people. And also the biggest problem we noticed was that, you've got a lot of people that want flexibility now as well. By having their business, it's going to allow them to do so, because you can imagine, say for example, a new mum, she's now giving birth to a beautiful baby. She's now having to probably, she's probably thinking, okay, what's the next stage of my life, right? I was a chartered accountant at PwC. I don't know where to go next, right? And she's thinking, how do I juggle my child now, 3 years later? How do I juggle my 3-year-old at home and also be able to work? Because I know financially we need it, but also I want it for myself, because I want my own mission statement. I want to be something, not just for my child, not just for my husband or wife. I just want to be something for myself. And so that's an opportunity for her, right? For her to be able to say, look, I'm going to jump into this role. I'm going to become a hub owner, and I have the flexibility to be whatever I want to be. And that's where you think, actually, but now I can be my own business owner, but not actually, I don't have to think about the marketing. I don't have to think about all the tech I need to use. I don't have to think about where the compliance is coming from, all the people. It's done for them, right? So that's ultimately what H3 Hubs is aiming to do, is trying to kind of, give opportunities to people.
I couldn't get. Sorry, I was smirking there because you said you said beautiful baby, and I don't think I've ever I don't think I've ever heard someone say, yeah, a woman gave birth to an ugly baby.
That you got to be careful when you're on the street and you say, oh, that's an ugly baby. but I think that's it's also because something, because I have he's nearly a toddler. He's now 11 months old. I've noticed the significant change it's had in my life by even being a business owner as well, right? If I started the business now, I would be struggling. I would be struggling so much because my attention in the evenings is not to the business; it's normally to them two. So I'm ensuring that I actually have time to take away from my my daily routine and spend it with them, even though it's still difficult. But you try to. And it goes back to, like, everyone's different. Everyone has different priorities. Everyone has different things going on in their lives. Their father or their mother might be struggling and they're in care in their home and they need to look after them. Or it could be that they're a young person that just doesn't have the confidence to do it on their own and they want the support. Or it could be an older person who might just feel like, actually, I've been doing this on my own for so long. I'm sick of just being on my own. I don't want to be a sole practitioner. I want to actually have that comradeship. I want to be part of that bigger mission. And that's the idea behind it. It's all about bringing in a community.
And I think with the industry, I think it was probably off air when we were talking about, that partnership model or decision making people.
Mhm.
And I was involved in a research piece with Steve Cox from Iris a number of
Yeah.
years ago, and the fastest growing size of firm, if you like, are the big guys, because they're acquiring firms, left, right, and center. And actually,
Yeah.
when that happens, when firms are acquired, they cut staff, or they streamline their processes. That's why they buy it.
Exactly.
But then the second fastest growing was the entrepreneur part. It wasn't the
Crazy.
middle part at all. It wasn't firms growing. It was firms being bought or people starting off by themselves.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
why is that? Well, the barrier to entry is lower. You don't need a 15, 20 grand Iris contract anymore to get
Exactly.
practice management. The software's there. To your point, you don't need marketing.
No.
You just need one of these now.
Yeah.
But you do need pointed in the right direction, and you do need help and
Mhm.
support, and you do need a community to do that. So just final sort of minute or 2 minutes,
Yeah.
if you like, if people are interested in HV Hubs, and the exclusive tech stack that you've got, coding
Yeah.
firms,
Yeah.
how would people
How
go
they
about
get in
that?
touch?
Yeah.
I mean, to be honest, just like add me on LinkedIn. Like, I'm always eager to help people, because I've been there, like, even in a position where I don't even understand like what I'm looking at in terms of what tech I want to introduce into the business. I tend to do ask other people as well. I say, like, what was your experience with Scribe? Like, was it crap? Was it good? Like, tell me about the whole process and how you brought it into your organization. Like, that isn't hard to help someone, understand that. Like, it doesn't take too much time. Now, I'm not going to sit there and say, I've got all the answers for you. Here's like 100 different apps you can use. Go ahead and play with it, because it requires you to go step by step, one by one, slowly integrating all these different things, and not just jump too far into it too soon. I think you need to focus on your internal systems first. You need to make sure that your team are able to take on all that responsibility as well, and that you have a process in terms of feedback and training. And then once you have that, then you can start bringing in all this tech, because then otherwise it's just going to go to waste, because you're going to spend money on something that will just sit there on a monthly basis that you're paying for, and none of your team will use it because you don't have a control in place to ensure that they're using it effectively.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
My takeaways here is and the first note that I wrote down, I think it was before we went live, was leadership. Hamish Edwards, that's our founder, the original founder of Xero. When he done the ACCA roadshows last year, and you guys were at them, his number one tip was, your number one client is your business. And I don't think a lot of firms do that. I think they treat their own clients as the main priority, which is lovely. And yes, they pay you the money, but you have to look after your own business to maximize that. It is your business. You are a business person at the end of the day. So it's all about that leadership, constant reviewing, and making the right decisions that are right for your firm, because it might not be Xero, it might not be outsourcing, it might not be this, but you have to take the time to do it.
Exactly.
Okay. That's me. You have waived your fees for 2 swearies that you had, so there is no. You've lost your £2 attendance fee, but I'm really excited about sharing the journey with HV Hubs. Got to thank you and your team for your feedback with FirmCheck as well. I hope the audience found it insightful. The comments were really good. Look out for the recording that is coming, and connect with Emilio and the team on LinkedIn for more.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks very much. Cheers, Emilio. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Thank you very much.